Today we're going to formally talk about how to find slopes from graphs. So let's go ahead and get started by looking at a few examples. First, I want to practice identifying if a slope is positive, negative, zero, or undefined. In our activity the other day, you should have been able to play and see the effects of slope. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to that screen really quickly. And you can see, so if I start, let's say we start here, right now my slope is at 2.2. And as I increase my slope, so now it's at 8, you can see that the line gets steeper all the way up until it caps out at 30. Now, traditionally it doesn't cap out, it would just continue to get steeper and steeper and steeper and steeper. However, it is never there's no value for a straight up and down line. It just continues to get steeper with a little bit of a slant. When it's straight up and down, we call that undefined because there is no slope. As I go back down and I decrease my slope, you can see that my line gets less steep. If I make it exactly 0, let me make it exactly 0. There we go. If I make it exactly 0, you can see that I have a horizontal line. So slopes of horizontal lines are always 0 because there's no steepness to them. And as I go negative, you can see my line gets steeper but in the other direction. So I want to compare as I move left to right, okay, down my graph. With negative slopes, it's down. If I change it to a positive slope, my graph is going up. So if I look at these examples, and I'm trying to determine what is the slope for each of these, on the first example, I have a line that is straight up and down. Remember, there's no, if it's straight up and down, that can't be categorized as a number. That's undefined. As I go left to right, since it's going up, that is a positive slope. As I go left to right, my graph is going down, so this has a negative slope. And when a graph is perfectly horizontal, there's no steepness at all, my slope is 0. Now that's the overall gist. Let's go ahead and talk about how do I find exactly what number a slope would be from a graph. To find that slope, or sometimes it's called rate of change, we find what is called the rise over the run. Now when we say rise, we're either talking about going up or sometimes our rise is going down. We're just talking about this vertical shift right here on my graph. Run is the change from side to side. So I'm either moving right or I'm moving left. And you can see on our graph that run is that horizontal. So rise is vertical and run is horizontal. And when I identify my slope, I write it as a fraction. I write the number of units that it rised or rose on top and the number of units that it ran horizontally on the bottom. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So again, I'm going to write my formula down. I want to rise on the top of the fraction and run on the bottom. So I'm going to come to my graph, and the very first thing I need to do is find 2 points. Now I have 2 points on my graph here and I have one right here. Now in order to get the correct slope, it doesn't matter which point I start with, but to make things as simplified as possible, I always start with the point that as I draw my line from left to right, I come upon first. So I come upon this point first and I come upon this point second. So to go ahead and find our slope between these 2 points, I go to my point 1 and I say, okay, I need to rise. So I either need to go up or I need to go down to get to point 2. Well, I need to go up. So I'm going to start counting the spaces in between. So 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4 space, 5 space. And notice I stopped when I got to a point where I was level with point 2. So I went up, I rose 5 spaces. So on my fraction, I would put a positive 5 in the numerator. What is my run? Okay, run is how much it changed horizontally. So continuing on from where I left off, I ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went to the right 5. So my run is 5. Now, one important thing to know is that moving up, down, left, and right, they all have a different sign associated with them. And this is something that I'd write in your notes. If I move up, that is a positive direction because I'm getting higher on my graph. If I move down, that is a negative direction because I'm moving lower on my graph. If I move to the right, that is a positive direction because the numbers are getting bigger. And if I move to the left, the numbers are getting smaller, so that's a negative direction. So make sure you have this written down somewhere as a note to yourself about whether the numbers are going to be positive or negative. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to check and I want to simplify. So first I want to check to see if I have the correct sign on my slope. So is this a positive? Right here, it looks like a positive slope since there's no negatives. 5 over 5 is positive. As I look at my graph going left to right, it is going up. So it is a positive slope, and now I need to simplify. 5 over 5 simplifies to 1 over 1. So my simplified slope is rise 1, run 1. Sometimes that can also be just simplified to the whole number 1. Let's go ahead and look at our next example. So again, I'm going to write rise over run, and this is something I'm just going to do until I get into the habit of remembering that it's rise over run. I'm going to start on my line and I'm going to trace it until I find 2 points, point 1 and point 2. I found my first point and my second point. So I notice as I go along my line that it's going down. So as a check, my slope should be negative. We're going to check that at the end. So let's go ahead and find our slope. So I'm going to go to point 1, and I am going to first look at my equation. It says rise. So I'm going to remind myself that means I either need to move up or move down to get to point 2. So to get to point 2, I can't move up. I need to move down. So I'm going to count spaces. 1, 2. I move down 2 spaces. So remember when we were talking about directions, that the down direction was negative. So on the top of my fraction, to represent the rise, I'm going to write -2 because I moved down 2. And on the bottom, I want to write my run. So let's go ahead, go back to where I left off counting. I don't want to go to point 2. You have to go back to where you left off and count my run. So 1, 2 spaces, 3 spaces. And that is to the right 3, which was a positive direction. So I'm going to write +3 on bottom. I'm going to check to see if my slope matched what I thought it should be. Yep, it's a negative slope. And does it simplify? Well, nope, -2/3 does not reduce, so my answer is -2/3. I want you to try this next example on your own. Remember to check to see if it's positive or negative before you graph it. Find your point 1, point 2, and then click pause and press play when you're ready to check. All right, so let's go ahead and check. So I look at this line and it's going up. So I know it should be positive slope. This is my first point that I come upon, and this is my second point. I'm going to write my fraction, and if I'm not confident of the formula, I'm going to keep writing down rise over run. I'm going to make my fraction for my answer. And I'm going to go to my first point and I'm going to rise. Well, I need to go up to get to point 2, so I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up 6 spaces. Remember, that's a positive direction. So I'm going to go to the top of my fraction where it says rise and put a +6 on top. And now I need to find the run. So I'm going to go back to where I left off and count my spaces. 1, 2. I move to the right 2 spaces, which is a positive direction, so a +2. I check my slope. Is it positive? It is indeed. There's no negatives in there, so that checks out. Now I just need to reduce. That simplifies to 3 over 1, or you could just reduce it to 3. Either answer would be appropriate. All right, now let's talk about, well, what do I do when the dots are not? I look at this graph, I'm like, panic, there's no dots. Hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my own points. Remember, points are, I can find an ordered pair where two of these cross. So this is at 4, 3. Now, is that dot on my graph? Well, no, it's not. So I need to go ahead and I need to find some ordered pairs on my graph. The easiest way to do that is to start at the beginning of my line. And when I say the beginning, I mean the most left point. So at the beginning of my line, and I'm going to go ahead and trace along it until I find such a pair. And I'm going to stop right away. Right here on this point, it lines up with -4 and -2. So this is my first point. Now as I continue along my line, now this doesn't line up, this lines up with 3, but that doesn't line up with a number. So I'm not going to stop there and put a point. I'm going to continue along my line. Now that lines up, whoops, now this lines up with -2, but it doesn't line up with the whole number up here. So I'm just going to continue on my path. Now when I get here, I notice it lines up with -1 and -1. So those are 2 of my points. Now if you found another point, fabulous. There are more than these 2 points, but I only need 2 to find my slope. All right, so let's find our rise and then our run. So remember, I found this point first and this point second. So I'm going to find my rise, counting up 1, 2, 3. So here's my fraction, a rise of 3 and a run of 1. So my slope is positive, just like my graph is, it matches. And 3 over 1 can reduce to 3, or you can leave it as 3 over 1 in fraction form. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to try this on your own. Find those ordered pairs and find your slope. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So I go to the very most left point of my graph, which is over here. That's not at a whole point, so I'm going to continue until I find one. So here's one. And as I continue along my line, I also see I have a point right here. So here's point 1 and point 2. I find my rise, which is counting down 3, so -3 over a run of 2. Last but not least, let's talk about 2 more graphs. Remember, this is a flat line, so it has a slope of 0. And this graph is straight up and down. Remember, that doesn't have a slope. I can't calculate its rise or run. It is undefined. And I don't even need to find 2 points.